Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we are going to see Advanced Active Directory Domain Services Management. In lesson 1, we'll see overview of Advanced ADDS deployment. So we'll see some of the following topics. Overview of the domain and forest boundaries in the Active Directory domain services structure. And we'll see why we need to implement multiple domains and forest. And then we'll see deploying a domain controller in the Azure IaaS and managing the object in the complex ADDS deployments. So first we'll see the overview of the domain and forest boundaries in the ADDS. So when we consider the ADDS object, primarily it will be the domain and forest. So these were the two main object. So when we consider the domain object, so the domain object cover the following boundary types, which is domain partition replication across multiple sites, and the administrative permissions, and the group policy object, and auditing, then password and account policies in the Active Directory if we wanted to implement any kind of password policies, and domain DNS zone replication. So in forest it covers the following boundary type, which is security and schema partition table, and configuring the partition replication, then global catalog replication, so that is the important one, and the forest DNS zone replication. So let's see why we need to implement multiple domains. So typically organizations might choose to deploy multiple domains to meet the following requirement, because the domain replication is important when there is a multiple sites for the company, and the DNS namespace required. So the distributed administration also, it's a requirement, and forest administrative group security requirements, and a resource domain requirement. So basically when we have a multiple sites, so when we make any changes in the Active Directory, so instead of every time contacting to the the single domain controller which is in a different location, it is better to have the local domain controller, so that all the replications will be happen within the same site. And once that replication completed, after that, between site to site replication will also happen. So that will not, make any impact for the users. And why we need to implement multiple forest. So organizations, might choose to deploy the forest to meet the following requirement, which is security isolation. In the PAM in Windows Server 2016, ADDS uses the separate Bayesian forest to isolate the privileged account. So in order to protect the credential theft technique. So basically, the privileged users or the administrator will have a separate privileged account, so that for any kind of privileged kind of action, they can use those different account instead of using their normal AD account. So in that case, in case of any theft technique happen, they can avoid it using the different credential and the user account. And incompatible schema requirements. So let's say if you have a different domain controllers running, for example 2012 and 2016 or 2019. So in this case, the forest and the domain level service will be different. So you need to have the same kind of schema requirement on all the different versions. So for that you need to set up the schema requirement accordingly, and multinational requirements, extranet security requirements, and the business merger or divested requirement. And deploying the domain controller in Azure IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service. So you can consider some scenario where you might require to deploy the ADDS on the Azure virtual machine in the following conditions. For example, in the DR scenario, which is disaster recovery, you might need to, have a virtual machine or the domain controller in a separate location or the region. So in that case, you can consider for the Azure IaaS. And geo distributed domain controllers, isolated applications. So in case if there is any critical applications which has more kind of restricted environment, so in those cases you can consider the domain controller to be deployed in the Azure IaaS. And consideration during the deployment include the network topology. So when you need to deploy the domain controller in the Azure IaaS, make sure you need to follow the following, deployment model so that it will be deployed as per the recommendations. So the network topology and site topology, service healing, IP addressing, DNS, and the hard disk read-write caching. So let me quickly show you the overview of the ADDS. So this is the Windows Server 2016 that is running the Atom inner domain. So you can navigate to the Windows administrative tools, and you can go to the Active Directory, users and computers, where you can manage all the ADDS objects. So under the domain, you can see there are some built-in, OUs and computers. So the domain controller, which is this local computer, LAN-DC1, and I have some of the OUs created to manage using the group policy. Basically, the group policy can be applied only to the OU level. So you need to create the OUs in case if you want to apply kind of any policy or any restrictions on the end user computer or even for any end user as well. So here, I have created some of the OUs like IT and managers, marketing, sales. So based on the requirement, you can create the OUs under this domain, and then you can apply the group policy. Similarly, you can access the other, AD, the Active Directory domain services like Active Directory sites and services, users and computers, and DNS, DHCP. So all those things you can manage from the domain controller. Okay, so that's it in this video, and I'll see you in the next. Thank you.